Hello. Well, as you know, this is a history of saps, blackjacks, and slungshots, and this time we are looking at a Carnie jack. That's Carnie as in carnival worker. And with a name like that, you know it's got to have an interesting story behind it. Speaking of that story, it was kind of discovered and preserved by Scott Foster, who's also the person who made this one, and that's why he sells these as Carnie jacks. He's half of the Sap brother making team, the Foster brothers, and I'll have a link in my description, of course. So, what do we got here? In short, it's a blackjack, right? Cylindrical body, bullet-shaped striking head, of a pattern, kind of that two-tone pattern, black and white, that seems to have been popular with kind of carnies, right? So these itinerant carnival workers. And when it comes to blackjacks and saps, as you know, in general, there's very little evidence of anything. So it's great whenever you can find any one of the little threads. And he found this one where, just from some old pictures and whatnot, some lore, that seemed to be the case. And it seemed like it was usually either black and white or red and white. Not that they were the only users who had, a two-tone model, not at all, far from it, right? Police did. I've seen examples of prison guard models that had them, or specimens, but kind of caught on. And if you think about it, they'd be into something a little bit different than maybe a plain black and brown, right? Just kind of carnival atmosphere, so it makes sense. It was probably a case where somebody started using one, got one made for them, kind of caught on with some of his fellow workers, and a really strange informal tradition was born. Now let's talk about this one here in particular, right? So it's a nice hefty jack, a lot of flexibility, and I'm going to have a surprise for you. That's because this one does not have a spring coil as the shaft, which almost by definition is what a modern blackjack is. There's actually a steel cable, which forms the connection, gives it its flexibility. So this is also a cable jack. The classic modern blackjack was absolutely the coil. Cables of varying kinds, battery cables, brake cables, insulated copper wire, that kind of thing was used historically, especially for kind of makeshift, a little bit more humbler versions. But you can make a nice, handcrafted one like this with top quality leather, whatever you want, and just choose to use the cable instead. It's got a really long, thick lanyard, as you can see, and I'll show you in a second how the different ways that could be used. But first I want to let you see all of the weapons. So there's the bottom. Notice that flat base, right? Not always the case, and notice how the lanyard extends out of both sides. As you guys know, that's not always the case either. So there's always just a ton of options when it comes to jacks. And I've got the lanyard in the most conventional grip right there, which is what you would imagine, right? Just run your hand through it, and if you happen to drop it, you can still resurrect it. But it's so long, you could also grab it, to use it from there like a flail. Notice all the different grips I'm trying there. There's my favorite. To me, that feels the best. 2 fingers through, the other 3 squeezing, and especially the top 2. Can it be used that way? It absolutely can, and that would increase the power dramatically because of the greater arc. So there again, look how long that is. So if you use it that way, you're basically holding a slungshot. It doesn't matter that there's a body up towards the top. It's really just a long, long connection, right, and a striking head. But that is why this is actually so long. That'd be your traditional grip, right? Nice and tight. It's not going to cut your hand. You saw the flexibility, and ow, that hurt. Right, gets the job done. So we've already seen 3 different ways to grab it. Here's kind of the wraparound. You saw the flail with some variation within there. And then, here if I grab it in the center, I've got more of a jabbing instrument, right? It's not going to swing very well, but I can jab with either end. And that does hurt as well. And here's my personal favorite for whatever it's worth. You grab the very end in the center of your palm, and you're maximizing the swing there. And you get more torque with the swing. It doesn't seem like it would make much of a difference, but with such short instruments, it would. And now I'm going to show you a blackjack striking technique. See that straight punch? I'm not doing that. I'm just extending straight out, and watch the head here. See it flick forward? Bam. So this is an interesting quirk about blackjacks. You throw a straight punch, and that head, just as I showed, continues on and gives you kind of a second, much more devastating strike. Now, let me quickly show some other combinations here of grips and strikes. We talked about that one, but you can also strike down, up. This is just wrist strikes, as you notice. So that's the thing about a blackjack. You can generate a ton of force in such a short span. And I hope you noticed how far the load kept going after my hand stopped there. Now you can jab, but with a cable jack, I don't think that's as likely unless you grab it in the middle, right? This is all about the swing. And notice that? That's kind of what I call a double tap. It's something you just wouldn't do with most weapons. And there's kind of a backwards flick of the wrist, so the conventional martial arts strike would be that there. And I have read accounts where people have gotten absolutely dropped with just one of those back of the wrist kind of flick. And that's just a quick overview. One of the other neat things about these is the way you use them. They're just different from a lot of impact weapons, right? Like that double tap. You just really wouldn't do that with an eskrima stick, you name it, right? A Neton bow, whatever. You really just wouldn't. But it works perfectly because of the bounce back and the spring back that a blackjack gives you. Speaking of that, let's go back to the cable versus spring. Uh, essentially the same weapon. You're going to hold it the same way, use it the same way, but there are differences. The cable is going to kind of flop, right? It doesn't spring, that's because it's not a spring. Whereas think of a metal coil, you bend it and it wants to aggressively snap back into place. So that's why blackjacks have that real unique wobbly motion, sometimes kind of unpredictable, but gives you crazy little applications like a wrist escape that maybe I'll show the next time I have a standard blackjack. Meanwhile, the cable jack can claim that it simply hits harder, which counts for a lot in these things. So let's wrap up by going back to the history. Why would this appeal to kind of a migrant worker like a Carnie? Well, for the same reason applied to so many others. It's compact, easy to carry, can hide in a pocket but deliver the same power as a full-size billy club. Not everybody wants to use a knife, something that's going to shed blood or, be maybe more likely to kill if they have to defend themselves. So that's the reason. And really just plays into my overall thesis, the result of my research and my book, which is that once upon a time these were as common as knives, brass knuckles, guns, or anything else in the possession of someone who was, either needing to defend themselves or, expecting some violence. And you can only imagine the colorful circumstances that would have attended such violence for the Carnie, right? Going from town to town, living kind of on the fringes of society. It could be Carnie versus Carnie, alcohol most likely involved. Carnie versus Rube, right? The Rube was the customer, kind of a contemptuous term for them, someone to be suckered, someone you're going to squeeze some money out of. I'm sure some arguments happened after a crooked carnival game where a blackjack was broken out to settle things. And the Carnie could be a good target for local thieves and bullies because he's going to be out of town soon. So historically, that's the Carnie Jack, and structurally, that's the Cable Jack. Thanks. See you next time.